welcome to another episode of Nationalist Radio America for the week of October 20th, 2017. I'm going to be trying something a little different today, and I'm joined by special guests Cato and Loaded Brush. This episode is a re-recording of an episode we did last night, but due to technical issues, the recording yesterday evening had to be scrapped. We were joined in the first recording by Loaded Brush and Brintier. I hope to have Brintier back, because I have tremendous respect for him, his passion, and the way he lives his stated values. Before we begin, I wanted to thank Caligula for bringing to my attention an error I also noticed in one of my previous videos. The correct pronunciation is Jacques Derrida, not Jacques Derrida. Also, I wanted to thank all the viewers who have come to the channel in the last week. At the time of recording, I have 27 subscribers and 392 views for my videos, which is a tremendous number for a little guy like me. Thank you all so much for your patronage. And thank you also to all the commenters on the Alt-Wrong Playbook, even for those that disagreed. That video received the lion's share of my views, completely unadvertised, at 276 views. I'm sure many of the viewers were people who disagree with me, and I'm certain I would disagree with them. But thank you anyway for tuning in and taking the time to comment. Now, on to the issues at hand. First, we have a story out of Texas. A federal judge ruled Wednesday that the federal government must grant a pregnant 17-year-old illegal immigrant access to abortion services through the taxpayer-funded Planned Parenthood. U.S. District Court Judge Tanya Chutkan ordered the authorities to transport the minor or allow her to be transported by someone else to the abortion clinic, quote, promptly and without delay. The ACLU brought the case to the court and argued that the Trump administration was forcing the pregnant woman, girl, I would say, to continue with the pregnancy against her wishes. Says Brigitte Amiri, ACLU attorney to the Austin Chronicle, the Trump administration's action is shocking. A young woman is essentially being held hostage and forced by federal officials to continue a pregnancy against her will. U.S. Deputy Assistant Attorney General Scott Stewart rebutted, saying the illegal immigrant is free to return to her country of origin and get an abortion there. It should be noted that an appeals court on Thursday temporarily stayed Chutkan's ruling on the grounds that according to Texas law, women must receive counseling 24 hours prior to an abortion. If the appeals court lifts the stay during a hearing Friday morning, the illegal immigrant, Jane Doe, may very well be allowed to get her abortion by as soon as this evening or Saturday. The HHS argued to the appeals court that the department has a policy of refusing to facilitate abortions, except in very limited circumstances, and reiterated that she was welcome to return to her country of origin and seek abortion services there. Loaded Brush, we'll go ahead and start with you. Should illegal immigrants have the right to abortion services or services at all?
Abortion is a huge issue, and it's a tough pill to swallow, forcing people to pay for other people's abortions, let alone ones that are for illegal immigrants who are just coming here to further exhaust our tax system and our education system and everything. It's pretty much a one-way street with the immigration thing. Can't dole out enough cash and gibs and stuff to make it all even out in the end. I just don't know how to please these people, really.
It does seem like there is no end in sight to the amount that they're willing to take. If it's not abortions, it's food stamps. If it's not food stamps, it's Medicaid and Medicare. If it's not that, it's things like unemployment and disability. That's a big one. There does seem to be no end. Cato, what's your take?
Yeah, they're really looking to work every loophole, every in they can get. They want to work the system. Native white Americans, European Americans don't. I'm sure they don't appreciate people coming over the border to work that system.
So I think the issue in this particular case is that it would set a dangerous legal precedent where if we give the right to one illegal immigrant to have an abortion, then we would have to give the right to all illegal immigrants. So somebody could come from, say, Iraq or Korea or wherever else, fly over here, not be a citizen, and have a legal right by precedent to have an abortion paid by United States taxpayers.
We already have I can't remember if it's the 14th or the 18th, basically the anchor babies amendment. But we have people coming over the border and having anchor babies who grant them the right to citizenship. They can stay here because they were born here. And like abortion is already an issue with Christian America.
Loaded Brush, Cato brings up a really interesting point with birthright citizenship. Is it better to have an illegal immigrant abort their child paid for by the taxpayer, or is it better to allow them to have a child here and be a so-called anchor baby and grant citizenship not only to the child but also through other means, through the Family Reunification Act, through that means bring the parent who had the child in the first place back to America. So is it better, in your mind, Loaded Brush, to allow them to abort? Is abortion ever right? Is it better to allow the illegal immigrant to abort the child, or is it better to allow them to reunify their family through the anchor baby?
So I think it's two wrongs don't make a right here. If you're going to give them an abortion right off the bat, you're using tax dollars, and no matter how small the percentage of taxpayers in the country are that are pro-life, you still can't steal from somebody through taxes in order to make them pay for somebody else who's breaking the law, and then you're gonna like go against this person's moral beliefs and stuff by giving them an abortion. So I don't think that's a really good a good strategy there. I mean, birthright citizenship, it's no other place in the world can you go and break the law to get there and then have a baby and that's like your foot in the door. It's not really a logical strategy. It's like pure emotional appeal that they use to push that with. The reality is that like Mexico could use a lot more help from these young people that are coming over, and all these people that have been here for so long and working so hard. They should just go back and do a little bit of work over there, get that place back on its feet, or at least, put some investing in that without just it being in the form of sending money back and that sort of thing. It's also like as soon as these people come over, it's like a double-edged sword. So you're either going to have to pay for them to get an abortion and compromise what's left of any sense of morality to do so by just basically christening their entry to the United States with a human sacrifice subsidized by the American taxpayer, or you're going to have them come in and give them 2 seats instead of 1 by having them have this anchor baby and then just continue to get whatever services that come along with it, being a 17-year-old mom or whatever, all the different things that are lined up, because then she's going to get to go to college and get, all these, going to get subsidized work and all that sort of thing. It's insanity.
We really have nothing to gain from being an American white taxpayer. When you have political parties that really, if you look at the statistics, if you look at the political parties and the way they're oriented, none of them represent us. If you're even subtly left or right leaning, neither of them represent you. They don't care. Neither of them care what you're doing left or right. Neither of them care how you believe how the border should be. They just want you to pay your taxes, and these taxes go to people coming to the border, taking up that tax revenue to forward their own agenda. I mean, you can talk about left or right, Democrat or Republican, how they use the tax money, but at the end of the day, none of them benefit the average white American.
I think you bring up a very interesting point. The United States taxpayer is by and large forced to pay for things that he or she may find morally objectionable. Regardless of where one stands, I think, on the abortion issue, you could dig deep enough and find something that your taxpayer dollars went to that you don't agree with. A good example would be, let's use a hypothetical and say you support Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood donated, I think, something to the tune of like $500,000 or some odd number like that to Hillary Clinton's campaign. That's your dollars that went to that, at least in part. And I think that's despicable. And perhaps maybe that's why the alt-right and the sort of reactionary movements have become so popular in recent history, because in many ways they are a third position. It's an oversimplification, perhaps, to say that the left wants open borders for a voter bloc and guaranteeing a demographic shift that always votes left, or by and large votes left, and the right wants low-skill, low-wage workers to put money in the pockets of fat cats. I think that would be a gross oversimplification, but I think it also holds some truth to it. What do you think, Lidded?
Well, that's just it. It's the whole third position. Politics has just come down to red fish, blue fish, and I think it's come to the point where we don't need a fish representing us anymore. We need somebody who actually is a little more grounded, I guess. Somebody who takes into, maybe doesn't fully like everyone agree with them, but doesn't compromise everybody along the way. I mean, that whole tax question. It's like, yeah, whether you're a Hillary Clinton supporter or not, whether you're pro-lifer or not, like a lot of this stuff, it ends up just taking a seat out of a seat from your kids or your grandkids or your lack thereof grandkids in their institutions. They're not learning Spanish in school. We're teaching English. It's like everything is slanted towards the minorities and everything, and it's basically selling the ground out from under us. And the whole Democrats, it's like, it might be in your interest, but it's not truly in your best interest. It's just appealing to the emotion and what makes you feel good, essentially. And it's like your altruism is how they get you, basically. So it's really not helping anyone. It's not helping Mexico. Like all the Mexican nationalists that come up here, it's not working out.
Loaded, you brought up a very interesting point in yesterday evening's recording that I wanted to bring up again and have sort of on the record. You brought up the English as a second language and how we as the taxpayer through schools subsidize non-native English speakers learning English as a second language. But there is no such similar course for native English speakers to learn any other second language to remain competitive in a market that is becoming increasingly skewed against a single language employee. It's fascinating to me that we as native English speakers must pay through things like college to learn these new languages. There are, of course, things like Duolingo and a number of other sites and services out there where you can learn these things for cheap or for free. But even so, we, the taxpayer, subsidizing the teaching of people our language. And it really is a fascinating point, and one I want to talk about again.
I mean, really, you're slowing those kids down, both kids. You're slowing the Mexican kids down by having to teach them English just to get by. So, would segregated schools be better? Just have kids learning in Spanish? Would Mexico just having competent schools actually be better? I'm sure all these people who have lived here for so long, they could probably go back and learn how to, do all the same great trades they do here, do all the same jobs, nurses, all the doctors that come over here, because apparently most of them end up being doctors, and that sort of thing. But like, really, all these people could go back and they could be teachers and they could be nurses and they could be roofers and laborers and restaurateurs and everything, and they could do it in Mexico and they could make it better. And a lot of them fight in the army, and and that's great, and they should have some of that pride and that courage and fight for their own country and their own blood. I think I remember saying yesterday that the only thing of value in the world is your people and the land that you come from. And so, we could roll back on history and see how long we want to. Like, we could get into a whole pissing match about who was where, when, and where we are now. But the reality is that the argument, like, if something was wrong in the past, it doesn't make it any less wrong now. These people just need to like reinvest in themselves and not just take away from the United States and the West, really. and they would do a lot better just by working among themselves as well. And the thing is they come here and they end up working to themselves. Have you ever seen an American working in a Mexican restaurant? No, they're all Mexicans. You never do, but it's the Americans who end up hiring, getting that nice cheap labor and hiring these other people in the normal like American jobs and everything. So it's a one-way street, and it's everything is kind of rolling downhill towards us, and we got to dodge this rock, otherwise it's just gonna roll over us, and we're just gonna be a pancake here.
You're absolutely right, and it seems to me increasingly obvious that every other group in America can have in-group preference except white people. I want to take a moment to talk about an article I read in the National Review today, and I don't recall what the article's name was, and I don't recall who wrote it, but it was fascinating to me, and it got me thinking. It talked about how the sort of mental image of white people has become so decadent and so atrophied from what it once was. When I imagine, and I'm in the Midwest, when I imagine an average white person, I imagine somebody who's very polite, who works for a living, who maybe, makes sort of the median wage in the nation, enough to live by and live off, and in many situations lives paycheck to paycheck, right? But it's always the yes sir, no ma'am. This sort of cultural idea as well of this strange equality, right? Where the person is just as comfortable speaking to the president as he is the housekeeper, because he's so confident in himself and his position in life, and he has such a self-respect. And I feel like that has been lost. And I feel in many ways that the idea of the average white person in America has become, in many ways, this sort of poor white trash, uncouth, promiscuous meme of a person. And I would argue perhaps that's by design, but I've noticed also that the same isn't true for other ethnicities in America. The black culture is put on a pedestal with how grandiose, rap videos are, all this money and things like that. And if you look to things like country music, I don't recall the last country song talking about investing wisely or, conservative values. It's just as decadent, isn't it? And all that is basically to say this, in-group preferences and the identity of a people are so contingent on not just how the group views itself, but also how the out-group views that group. And it's very interesting to me that we've put these people, these illegal trespassers, frankly, on such a pedestal, and we have built this idea in our minds, left and right, of this noble immigrant, right? This idea of they're here for a better life. That's the line that is repeated ad nauseum, isn't it? And it's just not true, is it?
It isn't true. Trump was right. They aren't sending their best. The people coming over to the border, they have like you. Maybe they want to work, but they aren't going to contribute to the American people in the long term. They aren't going to. Maybe their kids will get a college education, but overall, they don't contribute to our society. It's no good for the average white American. You don't benefit at all from someone coming over the border to take up jobs here. That could be your kids. This whole idea of they're not taking your jobs. It's no good for the American people. The average white American benefits nothing from someone coming and taking your job.
You're absolutely right. And it is a fascinating fascinating thing that we have allowed ourselves to be lied to in such a way. I distinctly remember the line being pushed in Sweden, the same line that we've heard here for many, many years. Well, immigrants do jobs that Americans don't want to, as if these jobs all remained unfilled, right? And then Sweden had this incredible immigration crisis. I believe they started importing migrants in 2004. And then it was just last year where that very same line happened in Sweden. They said, well, these migrants are doing jobs that native Swedes don't want to do. And I was thinking to myself, I'm like, I'm 28. I'm old enough to remember when Sweden was a largely white country. And I don't seem to remember them making many complaints about jobs being unfilled. And so it's this weird appeal to your emotion, and it's a lie. And it's fascinating to me that we've allowed that to happen. Loaded Brush, we'll let you get the last word, and then we'll move on to the next topic.
Yeah, well, I thought you were pretty generous when you just called them trespassers, because that is a pretty innocuous way of saying invader, or people who like just come here to replace us in reality. And like talking about the quintessential idea of like our image of these different groups that we have. I mean, the image of the white man is it's this guy who's just gonna tolerate things, who doesn't really have any sort of preference for himself, who's had it pretty good and is ready to give things up and pay it forward by giving everything he's got away. Basically, it's hard to be able to get good work and a good pay and then get ahead at all. I mean, most of the people who are working like 40 hours a week, they're not living on 40 hours a week. They end up working 50 or 60 hours a week and still paying rent and being basically just at the virtue of their landlord or their employer just to stay afloat. And people can't afford to get sick or to go to the hospital or to pay for insurance. These people come in and they get a really good deal coming here, whether they want to work or not. The little girl getting an abortion and then getting into some nice programs. It's gonna be pretty cozy for her, I think, and I can understand why people don't want to actually stay where they are and put in the work where they're at, where they're born and stuff. I guess it's just the whole globalist sort of worldview, and maybe it takes a certain degree of courage to just abandon everything, abandon where you come from, and just for a greener, easier, more like for the nice green grass up here. But I just don't really understand it. And like the history of immigrations, I don't think coming into another country and where you don't speak the language and you have a few relatives and that sort of thing, well, relatives regardless, but you come into a country and you don't speak the language, then you expect to get a college education in the first or second generation. That's not really how things work. It would take a generation or two so you can learn the language growing up in the house. That's sort of like a social responsibility to be able to communicate with the rest of the society and not just with your own in-group, your own enclave. So being able to function in society by learning how to speak the language at home, that's an incredibly big deal. And that would save, even if they could do that, it would save a lot of this secondary education or the tertiary education that happens throughout the entire public system of trying to accommodate the non-English speaker to try to keep them up to speed. It really just brings down, I mean, we have kids who are incredibly sharp who are having to drag their feet or eventually just get burnt out and lose interest in school because they're seeing all this stuff just get accommodated and they're not being challenged. They're not being engaged and they're just stuck dragging their heels through whatever basic common core curriculum that they have to suffer through, But these people can work hard and stuff, and they can do this maybe in a few generations when they're fluent and truly competitive. Then they could go to college and do it the right way, like it was done before with a homogenous society, But I think that I think it's just sort of, I don't know, we're kind of losing it here the way that we frame this. We kind of just gotta keep breaking this stuff down and redefining it, because there is respect and it's respectable to do it the hard way and to actually earn it and start from the ground up. And it doesn't really take courage to just walk in and receive stuff for free or to expect things to be handed to you.
Altruism has its limits. We can't keep feeding these people forever. We can't keep giving these people gimme dats forever. They have somehow survived on their own. They will learn to survive without us again. Teaching someone a language so that they can learn to take your job from you is a real thing. Deporting people who would have had the potential to take a job, yeah, it's a messy issue. But at the same time, when they look at 800,000 people being forgiven for coming over the border anyway, that they look at it like, in the millions. That 800,000 people doesn't mean 800,000 people. It means their friends, their family, their extended family. It's millions and millions of people coming over the border.
Chain migration is a very real thing, and I think that applies aptly to this situation, where there's a chain economic drain. It isn't just one abortion for a 17-year-old legal. It's potentially hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of abortions years from now. We'll move on to the next topic. A federal court case called the American Humanist Association versus Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, number 15-2597, has ruled that a memorial in Bladensburg, Maryland, must be removed or destroyed. The 40-foot-tall memorial, known as the Peace Cross, was dedicated to the 49 men of Prince George's County who lost their lives in World War I. 2 of 3 judges hearing the appeal, led by the American Humanist Association, agreed that the cross being allowed to stand was a violation of the separation of church and state, regardless of the memorial's stated purpose. Says the Obama-appointed Judge Stephanie Thacker, quote, "We cannot ignore the American Legion's affiliation with Christianity." She continues, "The display aggrandizes the Latin cross in a manner that says to any reasonable observer that the Commission either places Christianity above other faiths, views being American and Christian as one and the same, or both." The dissenting opinion by Judge Roger Gregory says in part, "The Establishment Clause was intended to combat the practice of compelling individuals to support and attend government-favored churches." He is correct. Adding and citing the 1963 Supreme Court decision, Abington School District v. Schempp, that it, quote, "does not require the government to purge from the public sphere any reference to religion." Several amicus briefs argued that ordering the cross removed could pave the way for the removal of crosses in places such as the Arlington National Cemetery. In Arlington National Cemetery, the Canadian Cross of Sacrifice is a 20-foot cross dedicated to American citizens who were killed in Canadian service in World War I. And there also is the 13-foot Argonne Cross. Across the globe, in places like Cambridge, Luxembourg, and Normandy, American service members are buried beneath crosses in military cemeteries. And I don't know how to pronounce this, so I'm going to give it a try here. The Apignani Foundation, sponsored by the AHA to the tune of a $1 million endorsement in 2009, is in some ways implicated in this. It believes, as listed on its website, that the, quote, "root cause of the world's problems are caused by differences of religion, race, and nationality." It goes on to say, "Barriers created by faith-based ideology must be replaced with the Foundation's holy trinity of humanism, science, and futurism if our planet is to survive." The AHA website defines humanism, with the caveat that it does not necessarily support this interpretation, as a, quote, "democratic and ethical life stance which affirms that human beings have the right and responsibility to give meaning and shape to their own lives," end quote. Except evidently if those meanings and shape are white, Christian, European, evidently. Cato, we'll start with you. What's your take on this?
Yeah, there's been an attack on crosses and generally Christian movement for a long time in America. The powers that be have hated Christian the symbols and symbology and everything that they represent. As America's been built, a lot of religious symbolism and mysticism has followed behind it. But we shouldn't just give them up just because we've ascended.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting to try to just wipe out the history and the memory of the faith in the type of people that fought in those wars, in those two, in the First World War, which was essentially just a war on the European monarchy. Europe was still basically it still had aristocracy and a hierarchy, and so this humanist, what was the unholy trinity they said? They just want to erase this memory of these people who fought against their own brothers in these horrible wars in the 20th century. And the thing is they didn't fight for this humanist futurism, not at all. It's just kind of like the state of, we can look at the meme or like the way that people view these different groups, and the way that those men viewed themselves was as Christians and as warriors and stuff, and not as just random putty to get thrown into the war machine. They actually fought. They thought they fought for something, and they fought for a country that they could recognize. And it wasn't just these vague destructive terms like humanism and futurism, which really just don't really mean anything. I mean, they wanted us to go from worshiping, remembering and recalling that we used to have great men who actually had beliefs, to just humanism, which is just worshiping men, but forgetting the great ones that actually fought and gave us this luxury that we're just giving away now.
It is pretty fascinating, and one has to wonder where it stops. The census for Prince George's County at the time, and one can't say whether all 49 of these men who lost their lives were Christian, but the census of the time indicates that overwhelmingly the population in Prince George's County was white and Christian. Like I said, you can't help but wonder where it stops. What's next? The Knights Templar were, not fighting for God. Where does this end?
They want us to give up ground everywhere. You can't stand for anything, otherwise you're this or you're that. And this whole idea of like church and state, it's like we have freedom of religion, not freedom from religion. I think I touched on that yesterday when we were recording, but yeah, it just goes back to like the people who used to fight, who would actually stand up, and unfortunately these men got coaxed into fighting against their own cultural brothers and racial brothers, that just other Europeans, and it wasn't for their own benefit either. It was just to take down whatever structure existed over there, and to chop us up into a bunch of little groups essentially, so that we could become more divided and more cultural and that sort of thing, and less unified by anything at all, really. And that's where we're at now, is we're all just divided even more. We all have our own interpretation of things, and if you contradict it, then it's not a matter of discussing it and finding out what's right and what's wrong, or where the ideas and the solutions can overlap or meet in the middle. It's just a matter of retreating and giving up more and more ground, giving up more seats in the institutions, giving up more free abortions for the invaders, and that sort of thing. It's really exhausting to just think of all these. I mean, every day you look at the headlines and to know there's something that they're trying to take away, or they're trying to erase, or they're trying to like silence you if you have any sort of opposing opinion and that sort of thing. It's just the totalitarian tyranny of this humanist futurism. And if you're not a humanist futurist, like an esoteric nihilist, essentially, then you have no place in the realm of discussion. But that's entirely untrue, because these people aren't critical of their own actions, really. They don't see, I mean, they know where they want this to go, but they don't see like what it's actually doing to us. it's kind of, some of us still have a bit of romance, a bit of a affinity with the past and for these symbols and for what actually like got us this far. I don't think they're just going to be able to gaslight us and then just leave us in the dark like they're trying.
There is a romanticism in feeling an attachment to one's past and one's ancestors and one's heritage. And there's no question that in many ways that is being stripped from us at every turn. And I think the thing about this story that fascinates me most, and it's so strange because once upon a time I would have maybe even supported this, but now I look at it and you don't even have to be Christian to oppose this. And it's just, to me, it is so despicable. And you have to wonder, don't you, if the AHA also supports the right of that 17-year-old illegal immigrant to have an abortion, don't you? It's truly, the hypocrisy is overwhelming and stunning. We are truly having our heritage stripped away from us systematically, whether it be the Confederate statues, the Confederate flag, the teaching of, or the preferential teaching, shall I say, of the contributions of non-whites in America, because history is just too oppressive and too white, and so we have to dedicate a certain allotted time period to the contributions of America to non-whites. It really is just an assault on reality, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, what they're going to tell us that we never had vegetables or roofs on our houses before we had cheap labor to put the roofs on the houses or to pick the vegetables. I mean, that's insane. I think we did it, and we did it with a lot less regulation and less standards, and we did it for a livable wage with our our families at home. But now we don't. But now families are like, you can't really survive. You can't live well enough to have a family now. I mean, barely. If you can scarcely, like the way they sell the like materialism. It's like you don't think you can have enough resources to have like a healthy family. You got to keep it to one or two, otherwise it's going to be so scarce. You're not going to be able to. No, not everyone will be able to have an iPhone, so it's not going to work out.
Yeah, the low time preference, sort of European stock, are concerned with their future financial prospects if they have too many kids too early, right? And yet the more high time preference people can have as much unprotected, indiscriminate sex as they want, and leave behind them a trail of single mothers who all end up dependent on the state. And, that is yet another assault, I feel, on the traditional value of the importance of the nuclear family. We see over and over and over, and it's never ending in the current year. It's just never ending. It's an assault on social mores. It's an assault on the values of traditional family, on religion, on community, on all these things. How dare you want to form a neighborhood watch because that's racist. It doesn't stop. It just doesn't stop. And you have to wonder, at what point will people finally have enough? Is there a point where people finally have enough and say, no, there were values that this nation was founded on, and they are important, and we stand by them. And I do wonder, and in some ways I worry, that has been lost and replaced with a culture where instead we worship the athletes, and we ascribe more value into things like sports teams. And, boy, those Falcons sure did good, didn't they? As opposed to, when you identify yourself, you think, well, maybe not you as in the hypothetical you, right? I think most people tend to think not, I am an American, I'm a working class American with strong values, I go to church every Sunday, and I have a loving family that I care, more than words can express for, right? Instead, it's sort of this, when they talk in the workplace, it's about, how did their team do? It's not about these lofty ideas, and I worry that unless we get that back, that we're doomed to continue down this decadent and troubling.
Yeah, man, the whole thing, it's like the neighborhood watch. I mean, you can't have a neighborhood watch if you don't have like an objective standard of conduct, and like if everyone isn't on the same page, then you can't agree to anything. You can't enforce anything. I mean, our whole society has like lost its aesthetic. It's lost its canon, its standard of beauty, of standard of behavior, standard of living, all of it. We're just entirely, we're bankrupt. And I mean, dead or not, I mean, it's clear that we are bankrupt, morally bankrupt, and we're bankrupt of any sort of identity or in-group preference for the most part. It's just too much, man. I don't even know where to start.
Do you watch Tucker Carlson at all?
Yeah, I watch him a bit. I've actually started to come around to him. Of all the normie newscasters, I think he does it playfully. He doesn't just let people scream at him, and it's not everyone agreeing with one another on his show. So yeah, he kind of actually puts a few in the win column, and he's fun to watch too.
Yeah, I love a lot about the way he does his show. He has a frequent guest on his show by the name of Mark Stein. And Mark Stein said something so simple and so profound, and perhaps it wasn't originally his idea, and perhaps it's written down elsewhere, and he just parroted it on Tucker's show. He said, in so many words, that you can only have common sense if you have something in common. And I spent a lot of time thinking about that, and perhaps that's why this story is so important to me. Because, as I said, I myself am not even Christian, and yet here I am talking about the removal of a cross, right? And I thought to myself, what a profound, meaningful thing to say. And it was so simple. I mean, this is at primetime news, right? Unless people have something in common, I tend to harken back to the Founding Fathers, and sort of, not even just the Founding Fathers themselves, but the population at the time. There was a overwhelming goal. Even let's use 9/11 as a more recent example, right? I distinctly recall, I was old enough to recall, after 9/11, everyone in the nation was bloodthirsty. Everybody wanted revenge. They said, we're going to find the people that did this, and we're going to get them back. And that was the common sense of the time. And I feel like now, in this hyper-individualized, overly sensitive society, that we don't have anything in common anymore. And it's by design, I feel. And we continually import people with whom we have nothing in common. And we allow everybody's opinion to mean just as much as the next person. And perhaps it should. But I think there must be a limit. Because truly, there is no common sense if there's nothing in common.
That's pretty true. And yeah, I mean, we see that that he really Mr. Stein or whatever really hit the nail on the head with that one, I gotta say. And that's pretty true. And that's why the whole thing is like everything organizes with things that share common interests, and the Founding Fathers, they were they were basically all Protestants, or the great majority of them, and that's basically defined by having different beliefs. I mean, they were all infighting and stuff, but they had a common interest, and they recognized each other to some extent, and they could actually, they were close enough that they could get in a room and actually iron out a standard of conduct that lasted and worked relatively well for a pretty long time. And the way that it's done now is that they've basically taken the subtle differences that you get, the variety that you get from having one group together, and celebrating the true diversity that you can have within a single in-group. And then they make it into like, now we're just shattered into many, many different groups, and everyone is individuals, man. And it's terrible.
It is truly one of the great problems of our time. And I wonder sometimes if it is not the result of, in the past, granting somebody the respect and the belief that whatever they were saying was truly heartfelt and truly an altruistic virtue, right? So somebody who would say, let's go pre-civil rights, right? Somebody who would say, we need to remain segregated. Maybe that wasn't born out of a place of hatred, right? But maybe out of a place of love. And maybe they truly did mean for good to come from that, right? And I can't help but wonder if we've lost that as time has gone on. And we just assume, perhaps, that people have maybe their own best interest at heart, or some evil interest at heart. What do you think? Do you think we've lost that?
Well, I think we've accommodated to such an extent that there is no more, like, we can't go back anymore. That's what I said earlier, kind of just about the whole, how we have to retreat and continue to retreat and continue giving up ground. And, we've become so, I don't know if secularized is the right word, but just so divided into all these small little groups that all want their own thing, and they don't really want to come together and find a common ground. You can't really negotiate, but it just comes into just being the cruelty of the majority ends up pulling this way. And that's kind of how the democracy ends up working. I mean, I don't really think it really works in the long run, the way that it's going, just from seeing what we've got now. It's just how you can sort of gracefully and humbly retreat in the face of an oncoming invasion, which is what we've got.
I tend to take a minority position in believing that people within a group typically have more in common with each other ideologically than they do different. And I can't help but wonder if things like the internet have given rise to this seclusion and isolation, and what is frequently called an echo chamber, that has allowed us to perpetuate this idea that other people don't have good in them, that their ideas aren't good. And I don't know that I have a solution for it. It's just something I ruminate a lot about, and I guess time will tell where it'll go. I think until we reinstate the value of community, that we are doomed to fail. We'll move on to the next story now. A story from Iowa. A student group called the Young Democratic Socialists of America, or the YDSA, has called for the hanging and exterminating of all capitalists, saying, quote, "I will not rest until HXC stands for Hang plus Exterminate Capitalists," end quote. After students brought the tweet to the attention of the university, it replied via Twitter by stating, "This falls under free speech," and then offering available resources if they feel threatened or harassed. Now, this isn't the first time the YDSA, an officially registered student organization, meaning it is consistent with the mission and culture of the university, whatever that means, has made inflammatory, threatening tweets. On September 30th of this year, it posted, "Comrades, stay away from needle drugs. The only dope worth shooting is in the Oval Office right now." What in the world do you make of this?
Oh man, that's pretty interesting and interesting language they decide to use there. I don't know where to go with that, you know? It almost sounds like they're advocating for violence, you know?
Maybe just a little bit. I'm not sure how else one could interpret hang and exterminate capitalists and the only dope worth shooting is in the Oval Office. Can you think of another case? I, at least to recent memory, cannot recall a case where calling for the assassination of a president was considered free speech.
Yeah, you know, I think I saw some guy who just said some like tertiary things about like I want to say he said it was like some mindless tweets about resurrecting Lee Harvey Oswald. This was back in when Obama was on the throne or whatever. So yeah, talking about resurrecting Lee Harvey Oswald, regardless of the fact that he was a communist, right? But in order to go after Obama or whatever, and the guy had Secret Service at his house like within a couple of days, you know, asking him how ironic or unironic his tweets happen to have been, and just sort of giving him a fair warning. You know, they got to check all leads, but now we have a social, what is it, democratic socialists at like getting sponsored at a college and having any resources provided for them and any extra security they might need to advocate for hanging anybody who is a capitalist. What is a capitalist anyways? Isn't that somebody who just invests in a business? It says, what's the definition? Oh, a wealthy person who invests in a business. So essentially anybody who is a net tax contributor can get hung. That's going to be interesting how that system works out. Just hanging anybody who contributes or invests in the society. That's pretty good strategy, I think.
You know, you have to wonder, don't you, what sort of intellectual honesty and values these people truly hold. Do they, in their Democratic Socialists of America group, if any of them have any jobs, mind you, do they pool together their resources and distribute them evenly? So somebody who makes $50,000 must give, say, all their wealth to a essential agency who disseminates the wealth equally amongst the people. You have to wonder, don't you? And it's fascinating to me too. Another very interesting point. The university in question here would calling for the hanging and exterminating of capitalists at free speech. But you have to wonder, would they call Richard Spencer or Jared Taylor or any number of other figures, would they call their presence and their rhetoric free speech?
You know, I think we could probably put that to the test. We ought to pay them a visit, you know, and just see how if they want to keep banging that free speech drum, because we could probably have something to say if they're all for the free speech and all of that, you know. I'm sure we could have our 2 cents in there and maybe round out their perspective a little bit.
You know, I think the question does in many ways answer itself, doesn't it? This is free speech, but what you say is hate speech, regardless of the fact that it's not recognized by any legal institution in the country. It's just it's hate speech and therefore not free speech. Well, what is free speech? Democratic Socialists of America? What is free speech, please? I'd really like to know, because in fact I think 300 million Americans would like to know.
Yeah, it's like in before hate speech isn't free speech, right? But they're like explicitly advocating for hanging anybody of a particular, not even, I mean, capitalism isn't even really ideology. It's just a way maneuvering in the economy right now. So I mean, essentially all those people who are coming up here, all the economic migrants, aren't they capitalists for coming up here? I guess they'd be socialists because they get Gibbs as soon as they walk over the border. But so I don't know. That's kind of interesting. I mean, maybe we could hold them to that at some point. I'm sure at some point in time somebody put these altruistic socialist Democrats to work to do a lot of mayhem, really. But this is just the quintessential useful idiots here.
You know, it's embarrassing. I think one must apply a lot of prudence to the things that they would post on Twitter, especially as a representative of a student group. And the lack of, I can't even think of the word right now, I guess awareness, the lack of awareness that these people have to post something like that and be okay with it and stand by it and not just do it once but do it repeatedly says a lot to me about the nature of what is and isn't acceptable as far as ideologies go. You know, if you hate capitalists, it's okay, you know, because you are fighting the bourgeois, oppressive, white, European, cis-het patriarchy, right? And anything else is more of the status quo, regardless of its intent to perhaps reform or make, as the Constitution says, a more perfect union, right? It's truly, to me, a fantastic look at what is and isn't acceptable thought. I mean, it's thought crime, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure seems like it. Like if you even entertain the idea of operating in the system as it is, then you're going to get hanged. I mean, it's absolutely insane. This I don't know. This is just so clear the way that they pitch their argument. There's just no way of unifying these ideas because they're not even coming to like convince us of their democratic socialism, because socialism was tried and it didn't work, so they're just going to try it again. And if you do it in a democratic way, it's really going to work because democracy works so well too, right? Especially when you have vast differing groups without anything in common, and you're going to really be able to find common ground. The thing is that democratic socialism is essentially what we have right now, and they're actually kind of, I mean, they're like making our argument for us. It's we know who leans towards socialism. It's the same people who come over here from the second or third world and come here for free stuff because it's here, because we live because you can't get a credit line in Mexico or in Africa or wherever it is that these people are pouring in from, Guatemala, whatever you want to call it. So I mean, all these, they come in, they vote for free stuff, they get free stuff immediately, and and then they want to attack anybody who pays into the system because it's oppression or whatever. I mean, it's just insane. There's no way of competing. What's the real tragedy too is that this is supposed to be like institutions of higher learning, that this is doing it, and so they really make it so that kids, I mean, there's no option. If you want to make ends meet, you're either gonna fight in a war, which you may not agree with. You're just gonna have to go fight, or you're gonna have to you can't really join, like, do an entrepreneurial thing unless you got a real good line of credit or something, or a whole group of people to support you right off the bat. So I mean, just joining and being a successful businessman in this labor market and that sort of thing, I mean, it's pretty impossible to do that. If not, I mean, it's probably not impossible, but it's incredibly difficult. And the third option is to go to a university and become a drum beating leftist and learn how not to critically think, but learn this critical theory of like destructing everything and dividing everything down until it can, until it's just rubble, basically. It's like intellectual demolition, essentially, is what you get at these universities and stuff. It's terrible. But they really got the market cornered too. They got like the human market cornered, because anybody here is just worked into the ground. They're receding, constantly retreating, and then everyone's coming in and gaining momentum as they come in to overwhelm us. And anybody who wants to try to climb up and learn, you got to go through severe indoctrination in order to get to that $100,000 of debt, and you're barely paying your mortgage at the end of 20 years or whatever.
Is hanging and exterminating capitalists a democratic position, would you wager?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably not going to counter-signal that. I'd say it sounds pretty democratic to me. I'd say it's democracy working as intended.
It truly would be the pack of wolves voting to eat the lone sheep, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's really like the rabbits and the wolf here, isn't it? It's how many rabbits can you fit, and just force the wolf out. Like how many rabbits does it take to overwhelm the wolves?
And you can vouch for this, Loaded Brush. The alt-right is not without its blame in this sort of extreme speech. Very, very frequently, we will see this sort of inflammatory rhetoric, and I speak out often against it because I don't see it as productive. I don't see it as nuanced, and most importantly, I see it as, in many ways, dishonest, because you can't, in my mind, you can't espouse something as a belief that you hold without living it. Many people in the alt-right are what I would call anarcho-fascists. They want the destruction of the current systems and the reimplementation of their own system, and then they act as if it's a principled position. They say, well, yeah, it is principled because it's a new system that benefits us. But isn't that just dishonest? Isn't it just at the end anarchy and saying, well, you're wrong and we're right? I fail to see the nuance, and I hope it's something that will change as time goes on, because I truly do feel like the alt-right, and in some ways the far right, can moderate their rhetoric in a meaningful way and present themselves in much the same way I try to the average everyday person, and say that, in no way do the current two parties represent you or the nation, and we have to nuance our beliefs and be ready to reach not necessarily a middle ground, but reach an agreement with our ideological enemies and say, well, let's come up with something that is beneficial for you and me. I mean, would that sound appropriate to you? Does that sound like, am I far off base here?
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. And there is a lot of the what some might call the self-indulgent extremists on both sides, I'm sure. I mean, it's clear that there is that on both sides. I mean, we see it kind of right here. These people aren't clearly not really having I mean, it is a strategy, but there's just no tact in it, And there's quite a bit of that on the right too, of course. But I mean, the whole idea of like flying the plane into the mountain and then trying to survive off of what's left, or the ship's sinking, so let's set it on fire and then see if something floats, and we'll make our ethno-state on whatever's floating in the rubble. It's not really it's not perhaps the best strategy. There's a lot of people who say you need complete and utter destruction before you can really breathe something new and kind of have the rise from the ashes or whatever. But I think we have enough people who speak the language and things, and I'm sure we can reach people and do this in a more elegant way, and actually more so have a couple of rafts leave the boat and go set up their own thing and seek land and seek their own sort of ideas in their own way. I think we could do this in a much better way than these sort of these japes of unironically hanging people or whatever you want to call it. There's all sorts of different these esoteric like exterminationism and all this other like just really like silly and not terribly relevant strategies. But the thing is like, they keep pushing everybody into these corners and stuff. It's like as soon as you come out as a Trump supporter, you just get shoved into the corner, and they kind of dictate what kind of speech is regulated there. And it takes a lot of tact, a lot of patience, and a lot of a lot of discipline to actually have a level head and not just fall into these sort of pissing, like ideological pissing matches where you're just like screaming at each other essentially, or like, oh, whoever can exterminate the other person first, or we're gonna lynch all the people we don't like, and you're gonna hang all the capitalists and everyone you don't like, or whatever. It's insanity, really, and there's nothing really good that's gonna come of it, I think. But things that maybe that worked in the past, and maybe we aren't there yet to do things in a elegant way because we are too divided. But I'd like to think that there's still a lot of middle ground, and the more middle ground is taken up, then the more sort of reasonable ways we can go about doing this, I think. But as it is, it's I think the left is striving very much, or they're really moving away from the middle and going into this very extreme sort of this insane way with the Trump delusion or derangement syndrome that's so evident with all these like normie liberals and everything, or the way that, I don't know, the way that just everything is getting shattered and broken apart, and just trying to make sense of it. It's really where the art is here. It's not in the beautiful paintings or the large, like the modern architecture. It's actually just in everyday human interactions is where the true beauty is today, and where you can actually like have any sort of real effect is the way you can just try to get an actual idea, and getting somebody to grab onto the idea and actually entertain it. It's so hard to get people to actually listen to something they disagree with. You have to almost trick them into thinking it's their own idea, or like try to carve up their own idea and serve it to them on a platter so they can see how it really tastes when it's all said and done. But there's a lot of work to be done, and a lot of space that still needs to be occupied. A lot of things that need to get talked about, and it'd be cool if it was a lot of people could actually come together and have discussions where maybe it's not two people who happen to agree on most things, but they get some of these people who disagree in the comments, or in the or on the other side, or even like just centrists or whatever. Have them come out and actually have them, first of all, define their ideas in ways other than just hanging people, or he's a bigot, and come out and actually try to find some middle ground and try to see where their ideas end and the next guys begin.
I think that is a very prescient statement, and one can only hope that we can move toward that. The optimist in me still believes there is hope for that, though each day I feel that slowly dwindle. But I think there is perhaps some merit in sort of the Nietzschean ideal of the man must experience nihilism before he becomes the Übermensch. And I wonder if maybe on a cultural level we are experiencing that nihilism. Loaded Brush, I want to thank you one more time for coming on, and I do apologize again about yesterday evening's issues. Hopefully we can make a habit of this and discuss more issues and examine the cultural condition of the West. So thank you again so much, and
thanks for having me.
Thank you all for watching.